text this evening, 1 Timothy chapter 3 and 1 Corinthians 7, verse 29. Are we okay?
Yeah, I didn't check to make sure it was the right link. I'm just checking.
I put it on the right link. Yeah. All right. And please remind me, guys, later I have the notes for your local church exam. I have it on the board as well to try to remind all of us. And we made it to the final point on the outline. Of course, I told you about the additional point. I've written it on the board behind me. We're going to discuss missions as well, by the grace of God. But on the last page, page 5, on make time for your family. That's where we're going to begin tonight. And let's pray. Father, as always, we need your help. We pray that you please guide us. Let the Holy Spirit speak to our hearts tonight. Teach us things, Lord, that we might be able to use for your glory, both in the near future and in the distant future, Father. We understand this is an important topic, that of the church, and I pray you please show us just how important it is. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we're talking about the pastor and his home, some of the challenges, just general advice, and we're starting off by talking about making time for the family. I want to show you two sides to this coin. All right, 1 Timothy 3, let's begin there, and verse number 4. This is part of the qualifications for a bishop, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? So you can see he has to be mindful about how his home is operating, not just for his own happiness, although that's a legitimate reason, and not just for the sake of his wife and kids, although that's legitimate and right, but for the sake of testimony for his church. They need to have a good example of what a godly husband and father looks like. Now, this is the thing, though. No matter how good of a husband or father you are, your wife and children may not fall in line. Some of God's very best men down through church history have had sorry excuses for wives and children. I mean, so much so that pastors' kids are often the butt of the joke, right? They are known for being promiscuous and naughty kids. In America, we call them PKs, and if you're a missionary kid, you're an MK. So that sounds like, and then there's AKs, which are 47, it's a machine gun, just mow them down with all those Ks in there. So you want to be doing fulfilling the will of God as a husband and father to the best of your ability. Make laws and boundaries and rules for your home that make sense, that are biblical, that are realistic. Don't set the expectations so high that your family can't live up to it. Yet at the same time, every individual has to choose whether or not they're going to fall in line with the rules. Now, where do we learn this? God. He set down the rules for Adam and Eve, didn't he? And they chose not to follow those rules. So you can't blame the ruler for having bad rules or for not being a kind, loving, I want to say potentate, that's the wrong word, but the one in authority. It may not be his fault. You have to dig a little deeper. All right, so this passage, along with several others, would help us see that a pastor does need to be mindful of his wife and kids and make sure that the home is a happy place. But look at 1 Corinthians 7, verse 29. But this I say, brethren, the time is short. It remaineth that both they that have wives be as though they had none. Well, then we got to be careful with this advice that if you're in the ministry, be sure to always put your family first. And you hear that, and I think it's well-meaning advice when people say that. But be careful, because there are some pastors that go to an extreme with that and begin to hide behind their families and say, well, instead of being the pastor I'm supposed to be, instead of putting the proper and necessary work into my sermon or into, evangelization, discipleship, all those things that need to go with a church, well, guys, don't blame me. I'm just spending time with the family. And they kind of hide behind that as an excuse. I'm not saying it's an easy balance to always maintain, but it's a balance you have to strive for. That's what Paul's getting at. We don't have a lot of time, so redeem it. Make the most of it. If you're married and in the ministry, yes, there's going to have to be a time where you say no to the ministry to maintain a healthy marriage. And the same thing with the relationship with your kids. But you cannot oversimplify this and say marriage always trumps ministry. That's not true. Sometimes you're going to have to tell your wife and kids, I'm sorry, guys, Dad can't be involved in this because God has me doing something different. You're going to have to pray your way through that. I think it's dangerous to oversimplify it and say it's always one decision or the other. It's wrong to say it the other way and go, ministry always wins. Marriage and kids always come second. That's not always true. Look at how Paul continues on here. Go down a little bit, verse 32. But I would have you without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. So Paul acknowledges that if you're married, you're not going to be able to do as much in the ministry as the unmarried guy. That's fine. That shows us that, yes, you do need to be mindful of your marriage and take time for that. But you're going to have to strike that balance and at some time say, honey, it's time for me to focus on the Lord. Look at verse 5, same chapter. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 5. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer and come together again, dealing with the physical side of the marriage. Well, you see, there's a time when you say, honey, I'm not here for you right now. My body, spirit, soul, I'm dedicating the whole thing to God at the moment. And it has to be done with consent. So you talk to your wife about that, work out, make sure that she is in a good place for this, that she doesn't have needs that need to be tended to immediately, and then you can proceed. So you're going to have to work at that balance. Just imagine if Abraham had set his default mode to marriage over ministry, and God comes and says, now sacrifice your son, right? Well, there's a shining example of how sometimes family comes second, right? And you can even go farther back in Genesis 12, when God says, Abraham, leave country and kin, he didn't say, let me go consult with Sarah and see if that'd be okay. He went home and said, honey, the will of God is, and she was not afraid with any amazement. She said, I know my man has a walk with God, and I trust him, and off we go. Now, let's also talk for a minute about the opportunity you have being in the ministry and being married, especially for the ladies, right? This question came up after class last week, and I'm glad it did, and I wanted to address it in this section, so we'll spend a few minutes on it. What can a woman do in the ministry? We're focusing on the pastor and his family in this whole section, but what about a lady? We have ladies here. What can they do in the ministry? I'm going to ask that question from a different angle. What can a woman not do in the ministry? Because I think that's an easier way to answer it. There's just one thing she can't do. She can't lead the church. That's it. She cannot stand up during the church service and lead. Everything else she can do. And what a fantastic blessing it is if your wife is a fellow laborer in the ministry. Oh, wow, can you get so much done, not just for each other, but for the Lord. And I'll tell you what, the fellowship that you can experience with your spouse, serving the Lord together. I don't know of anything more intimate, special, it creates a long-lasting bond. Those moments, those memories that you create together, there's something incredibly special about that. Let me be careful to say, do not force your spouse or your children into the ministry. God called you, sir. So that's your calling. You go do it. Now, just like the other church members, you wouldn't go around to their house and demand that they get involved with every small nuance of the ministry, right? And be careful not to or push your family or expect too much from them to say, okay, since I'm in the ministry now, I expect you to do every other part of it alongside me. That if they're not willing, that's going to create some friction. That's going to come across not only in your home, but in the church. So as the kids are young, right, they need to be obedient. You tell them, listen, we're going to church setup, we're going to prayer meeting. They need to fall in line with that. But at a certain point in their life, they're going to start making choices based on what they'd rather do. Now, they still need to obey. And I had to do this with my kids at a certain point, right? Our oldest said, I really don't want to go to church. I said, tell you what, I can give you a lot of reasons you should, but your walk with God is exactly that. It is your walk with God. So while you're living under my roof, we have a rule in my house. You go to church. If you live in my house, I don't care if you're kin, right? If you're related to me or not, if you're under my roof, even staying for the weekend, if you're under my roof, we go to church. That's where we're going to be. I'm not going to cut corners. Oh, I got visitors from out of town, so I'm skipping. No, sir. I dare you to show me a verse that says out-of-town visitors means you don't have to do the will of God. I'm sorry, that's a pathetically weak excuse. So if you're under my roof, you follow the rules. And the rule is we go to church on Sunday. I got a verse that says we should do that. Yes? Okay. Now, I told my oldest, when you get out and you're on your own, you have your own roof, and you want to live by a different rule, I'm going to love you all that I can as a dad. I'm not going to agree with that decision. But I'm going to let you make that decision when it's your turn to make the decision. But I'm going to rule my house well. I'm going to try to have a biblical standard for that, see? So I'm not forcing her to enjoy it, but I am forcing her to at least be there. Now, if I want her to be involved further, like with Megan playing the piano, I want that to be willing. I'm not going to say, hey, because you're my daughter, you have to do all this long list of stuff for the church. Caleb was the same way. He was very involved, right? He did so many things behind the scenes, but he wanted to. And I would constantly ask him, Bud, are you okay with this? I'm asking a lot of you, and especially when he went to university. Guys, he was doing engineering, right? Studying first-year engineering is hectic. Yes, that's first-year stuff is hectic. And he was homeschooled, so he's getting used to school off of this campus, right? Because he actually stayed in this room here at one point. And he went ahead and finished Bible school that year, faithfully. Never missed a class. Came to every class for his final year of Bible school. And I kept asking him, Bud, you don't have to do this just because you're my son. You can wait and finish Bible school some other time. He said, Dad, I've prayed about it. It's my decision. This is what I want to do. Now, see, as long as they're willing, go for it. But don't force them into it, because then they're going to get very resentful, and it puts a bad taste in their mouth down the road. All right? If you want further information, especially you ladies, what can a woman do in the ministry? I've already said what she can't do is lead, right, in the church. But, Christina, if you want to see how much potential there is for a lady in the ministry, just ask her get some experience from her. Her and I were talking, what was it, yesterday, honey? Yesterday, the day before, about this very subject. I said, I cannot think of, outside of leading the church, I don't think there's anything else she has not done. She has literally done everything else. She's taught ladies' meetings. She's taught Sunday school. She's organized special events. She set up the sound. She does the videos. She does the YouTube stuff. She's been the secretary. She's been the accountant. She does all the ordering. She prints the tracks. She cuts the tracks. She does the designing of the tracks, counseling, marriage counseling, pre-marriage counseling, post-marriage, every single thing. She's won people to Christ. She's been on the streets. She's been there while I'm street preaching, passing out tracts. She's passed out tracts. She's won her own converts. She's had several discipleship groups that she's carried on. Every single thing. So if you want to see what could possibly be done, I don't know of a greater example than this. And that was her part-time job. She was wife and mother before all of that, homeschooling the kids and taking care of this one all the time. So when ladies ask me, but what can we do? Wow. It's almost limitless, right? Just with that one limitation, everything else wide open. All right, let's continue on in the packet now. So the next thing in the packet, spend time with friends. Be sure to do that. You need a dose of reality. If all you have is ministry, you become tunnel visioned, and it becomes very difficult for you to relate to the world around you. And it affects your preaching after a while. You're unable to relate to the guy who has a job or has a hobby, or all of a sudden you can't even talk about those things. Having some friends that understand the ministry is very helpful. But here's the temptation. All of your friends are preachers. So when you're with them, all you talk about is the ministry. So what I have found is it's very difficult, actually, to have friends within the church. Very difficult. Because it's not, I wish I could do something about this, but it is what it is. When people come to the house, I invite them over for dinner, they're with the pastor. They're not with Mike Flick. They're with the pastor. They're not hanging out with Brother Mike. They're having a meeting with Pastor Mike. And, people, they tense up a little bit. I don't want the pastor to hear me tell a weird joke or say something wrong, or, I don't want to share my my real experiences with him, because then he's going to preach about it Sunday. I need new material, guys. I need you to come around, right? What else am I going to do? So, honestly, it gets tricky because people are afraid to be themselves around you, and you can feel that awkwardness. I wish it wasn't like that, but it is. I tell you what's been very helpful is to go out and play a sport together. Just do something that's not ministry related. To go do like that MMA stuff, rolling with Johan Gucha, it's very hard to be pretentious when you're thumping each other and putting each other in headlocks and leg locks. I mean, but doing that kind of stuff is necessary. So don't forget that you're still allowed to be human, right? Obviously, you don't need some dark, secret, wicked life behind you, but it's fine to have hobbies and things that you can enjoy with other people. All right, the next thing on the list, be smart with finances. I can speak from personal experience. I learned the hard way. I was horrible at that. You guys are going to have to let me know. Can you hear me okay? The rain's coming down now. I had no financial planning. I was a complete and absolute zero at this. Money came in, and there's people with needs. Money went out. So when we were in Malawi at one point, I went to Christina and I said, honey, what are we going to eat tonight? She said, nothing. I said, what do you mean? She said, there's no food. I said, well, why didn't you go to the store? And here I am getting upset with her. She said, honey, you gave away all our money. I said, well, that explains that, doesn't it? I wasn't keeping track of it, right? A good man showeth favor and lendeth. That's Psalm 112, right? So that's what I was going with. Let me be a good man. I'll lend. But the end of that verse says, he will guide his affairs with discretion. So you got to be smart about this. I made absolutely no plan for my children's university. No plans at all. So the year of, when Megan was about to start university, I didn't realize it, but foreigners have to pay up front. We can't pay monthly. So I owed 47 or 44. I think it was 47,000 rands up front. I found out just a few months before the time to pay. I had no plan. I had no savings, nothing, because I had just been putting it into the ministry and paying the bills. I don't recommend this. This is what I did. I went to the ATM, because that's how we usually get our cash. Every time I made a withdrawal, I'd put 1,000 rand into the commentaries on my shelf. If you remember the live streams, I have red commentaries behind me. I would fill every 4th chapter, I'd put 1,000 rand. So by the time we had to pay, I went to the shelf, I took off the commentaries, and I dumped them out on the table, just, like this. Dumped all the money out, big pile of it, counted it up, 47, the exact amount, down to the last cent was there on the table. That's just God being merciful. That's not how you should do it. That is not me walking by faith or nothing like that. That was just me going by stupidity. You need to make a plan. What we did is shortly thereafter, we went to FFG. Now, that's just, I really appreciate the way they helped me out. I know there are other organizations that would do just fine, but a gentleman there helped us out, turned us on to some investing type of ideas and savings plans. Now, we've always had a savings account. It's not that we haven't been wasteful with our money, but I never thought about the distant future. So now we have a plan. If I ever get too old to preach, which I don't plan for that to happen, I plan to preach until I have no breath in my lungs. But I'm sure there's going to be a time where I have to slow down. Maybe I can't have the full support that I now enjoy. Now we have a plan for that. We have a plan. Amy, rejoice in this. Her education taken care of. If we had started this plan when I was in my early 20s, we could have bought this house cash just for putting in 200 rand a week, something like that. Why we didn't think about this sooner, that's my bad. That's horrible, but that's me. That's what I did. Learn from that. Think about the finances before you get too deep into the ministry. All right, 1 Timothy, come back to that, chapter 4. Next thing on the list is mind your health. The way I approached it, again, I'm going to ask you to learn from my mistake. I just figure I'll burn the candle at both ends until there's nothing left. And if I die early, I die early. Just press on because there's stuff to be done, which is true, right? But not exactly wise. That's a bit foolish and a bit zealous, but it's all zeal and no wisdom. So in Malawi, I just pressed and pressed, and all the sicknesses and everything, I just ignored them and pressed right through it until I landed in the hospital down here. Was it about a year? Not even that. A few months before we left Malawi. I was stuck in a hospital down here. I was in horrible shape. I was asked to come and preach a revival, so I piggybacked the revival with the hospital visit. I was doing both at once, which isn't smart. And even not too long ago, right, I just kept pressing, doing 14-hour, 16-hour days and just work. A lot of ministry and thinking, well, hey, it's got to be done. This stuff, I'm doing it for the Lord. My intentions were right. But the problem is, it's a long race. And I was doing the whole 100-meter dash, type of idea. So 1 Timothy 4, verse 8, for bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having promise of the life that now is and of that which is to come. Godliness is better because it helps you in this life and in the next, right? So temporary and eternity does both. But bodily exercise is profitable. It says it profits little. What's the little? This life, right? It doesn't help you in eternity, so mind the balance. I recently heard about a pastor in America who gave up his church. It was kind of a mutual thing. His members asked him to step down, but he said, I don't want to be your pastor anymore, because he had decided to become a professional bodybuilder. And they didn't like him being on stage in his bikini briefs, flexing in front of everybody. And his defense was, well, women are supposed to be modest, but nowhere in the Bible does it say men should be modest. So there's nothing wrong with me prancing around in my underwear, showing off my muscles. I think that's like hyper-dispensationalism there, right? He's rightly dividing a little too much to take that verse out of the context like that. But by all means, mind your health so that you can last a while. I wish I had thought about this for the sake of my voice, but thank God I have enough voice now. I can still continue on, and by the grace of God, for the rest of my life, I will never have the voice that I once had. I do not see that ever coming back. I have to now be smart about how much I use it. But even now, I can feel it. Last night, I slept just a couple of hours, and it's been like this the last 2 or 3 weeks. I'm going to have to cut back again for the sake of my health, because once I fly to America, then I really get busy, which is saying something. So I've got to be smart about that. Guys, you do the same. A lot of preachers, they're known for, they call them gospel blimps. Do we know what a blimp is? Maybe you've seen the Goodyear blimp on TV. Let me see if I can draw it out a little bit here. So you have a blimp like this, then it has a motor on the back. So this thing's up in the air, like the Hindenburg, wasn't that kind of a blimpish type of thing? But then this thing, in America they have Goodyear as a tire company. So they're known for the Goodyear blimp. So over a football game or something, you'll see this blimp. It's bigger than any plane you'll ever see. And it flies through the air, big, fat, full of hot air. Well, they call preachers the good gospel blimps because they just get big and fat and full of hot air. And they just go everywhere, all around the country, just hot air everywhere. Well, that's not a good testimony. Men get in the ministry and they just get big and fat because you're sitting at a desk studying all the time. Or you're meeting somebody for coffee, or some member has you over to their house and they feed you a nice meal and give you dessert after dessert after dessert. And all of a sudden you just eat and sit. You have got to force yourself to go get some exercise. Dr. Ruckman told us in Bible school, he said, if you guys don't go to the gym, because we had a gym there at the school, he said, if you don't go to the gym, you're going to end up looking like a hard-boiled egg with eyeballs. And some of those guys did. I mean, it was a bit weird to look at them. He said, go play some sports and get some of that aggression out. And the ladies did as well. I mean, everybody needed to stay fit. So factor that in. Last one on the paper here. Take time off when necessary. Come to 1 Timothy 5. Should be just next to it there on the page. In verse 17, this is your attendance code. Let's make that a little bigger. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 17, take time off when necessary, for whatever reason. If it's health, if you need time with your family, vacations are not wrong, okay? I'll show you in a verse now. Remind me in Mark 6 about this. 1 Timothy 5, verse 17. Paul says here, let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially they who labor in the word and doctrine. For the scripture saith, thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the laborer is worthy of his reward. Jesus, when he was asked, or when he was praying rather, he said, pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he would send forth laborers into his harvest. So this word labor comes from a Greek word. God help me to say it right. I am anglicizing it for us. Koriao, I think is how you would say that. This word, I've given you the definition. It means to work to the point of fatigue or exhaustion. So you're working hard until you get tired. Now, here's the thing. You work to that point. There's no biblical demand that you have to go past that point, right? Although, I will say, often, once you get started, it's hard to just back off and go, okay, guys, now I'm tired, so I'm going to leave you be. One of the hardest things I have found in the ministry is to tell people no. I mean, last night until 11:30, I had messages coming in. How do I tell these people no? And then I'm up at 3 in the morning, and messages are coming in. And then throughout the day, I come back from therapy, and I have another meeting I've forgotten about. Bam, and how do I slow this train down? I'm past the point of fatigue. I'm so tired, I don't even know how to say it anymore. But eventually, and even today, I put this lesson into practice. Somebody called again and said, I need you to do this and this and this for me. And I said, no, I love you, but no, that's your problem, not mine. I love you, grow up, handle it. I said it a little nicer, but but honestly, that's what they needed, right? Because there's only so much I can do. Now, know your limits, and the limits might change from time to time. For me, I know, and I think I need to say this out loud, if not for you, then for me. A lot of my time is being taken up with counseling, and counseling is not a bad thing, right? But can you show me the verses where the Apostle Paul counseled people? Let's think on that for a moment. Peter? How many times do you read anywhere where the early Christians scheduled a counseling appointment with James, their pastor in the book of Acts? Now, I'm not saying it didn't happen, okay? It's not as if there's a verse that says don't go for counseling. I'm sure that it happened. I'm sure that it did. Aren't there plenty of verses in the book of Proverbs that talks about obtaining wise counsel and in the multitude of counselors, right? So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But what I have noticed is this, and this is really what wears me out in multiple ways. Not just physically, but emotionally, this drains me. I preach on it, and then a week or two later, somebody comes and says, I need counseling. And I go, I just preached on that, but they weren't there. And there's a big temptation in me to say, listen, you missed it. I'm sorry. I'll circle back around to that in due time when the Holy Spirit says so. But now I have to double up on that work. That's just not fair. So what you do see in the New Testament, you go to church and you hear the preaching, and through this biblical preaching, you get the counsel you need. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, reproof, correction, instruction in righteousness. How do I get my life right? There it is. If the guy in the pulpit is doing his job, you're going to get pretty much everything you need. Now, there are going to be some unique circumstances, right? Some things in the marriage, or maybe you have just an awkward situation that cannot be dealt with in the pulpit. Then obviously ask. Don't be afraid to ask. And I'm not saying this so that you're afraid to ask. Please come to me, but I've got to do a better job of saying, you know what? I cannot fill my schedule morning to evening with meeting after meeting after meeting, especially when you refuse to avail yourself of what I've made available in church and what's available for you in Bible school and in counseling sessions and in preaching class. All these things I try to put together. I can't have all the extras coming on top of that. So just keep the main thing the main thing. I was reminded today by a good friend, God called me to preach, not to counsel, which is interesting. God called me to preach, not to counsel. So I've got to preach the word. I told you I'd show you Mark 6. I didn't get to it. Let me show you that real quick about taking time off. I think I want verse 31. This is after the disciples came back from a preaching trip. Jesus sent them out, you remember, 2 by 2? And then verse 31, he said unto them, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat. That's how busy the ministry got. They didn't even have time to eat. I can't tell you the number of times Christina tells me, honey, I'm so hungry, it's dinner time. I forgot to eat today. Because her schedule's just as busy as mine some days. And they didn't even take time for that. You know what's crazy? They went off into the desert to get some rest. You know what happened? The feeding of the 5,000. They went out there and this massive group found them, and off you go to more work. And that's where the ministry gets very challenging. So you labor to the point of fatigue, yes, but then you have to know, I need a break just so I can keep myself going. Can I offer one more verse? Come to Acts chapter 20. I just want to say one more thing about this whole counseling idea, because I don't want to put a bad taste in your mouth for counseling. It's not a bad thing. But I do think that we need a better balance to realize that what we're feeding the flock from the pulpit should suffice for almost everything. And then if they're getting that from the pulpit like they should, those unique cases, right? Those you can focus your attention on them and do a better job of counseling those people that really do need it. Acts 20, I want to give you this here, what Paul said in verse 27. He's talking to the Ephesian elders. He says, For I have not shunned, I didn't ignore my responsibility. I've not shunned to declare unto you all the counsel of God. So here he's counseling them. But you wouldn't think that Paul sat down in his office and talked to them one by one. The way that he gave them counsel is by standing up and saying, Thus saith the Lord, and telling them everything that God wanted them to hear. And it was through teaching and preaching, that type of thing. You can see that in the passage even. All right, so now let's shift our attention to missions for just a few minutes. Let me first ask any questions about the pastor and his home, or what the ladies can do, that side of it. I think we've covered it, yeah? So if you guys think of anything, feel free to ask later. All right, missions. Let me work off the board. I actually have it rearranged on my paper. I like this order better. I am not trying to say that these are the only 7 things you need to consider when going into mission work, but at least these 7 things. Numbers 1 and 2, I think they can go either way. So actually, many of these things you can change the order. But number 1, take a survey trip. Go see the place. If you think, especially if you have a burden, right? Remember, there's a difference with calling and burden. If you have a burden for the place, go see it. If you can financially swing it, and the schedule and all of that, especially if you're single, because man, there's so much less to think about. You have that opportunity. Go see a foreign country. Even if you don't have a burden, go see a foreign country. Seriously, and I'm not just saying it as a tourist. We have missionaries we support. They probably would appreciate a visit from a fellow Bible believer, especially if you're not going to be lazy. Now, if you're there just to be a tourist and expect them to be a taxi service, please do not even tell me that you're taking the trip, because I will call that missionary and say, don't help them. If you're going to go, be a blessing, not a burden to them, right? But go see a foreign field. After COVID calms down, God knows, I hope it does at some point, to where we're able to travel a little more freely, I want to start taking these trips to Malawi again, taking people to India, just to expose them to the mission field, let them see it. Take the survey trip. This might help you with the calling. Now, God can call you before you ever see the place. So that's why I say these things can be the other way around. You might know that you're called, or at least be leaning that way, then go see the place, and when you're there, God can show you even more, all right? But numbers 1 and 2, this will come first. Now, once you've determined, yes, I'm called, I've gone and seen the place, during your survey trip, it's actually another list altogether. But while you're there, survey. Take a list and check out everything you need to know when you're going to live there. Even if you're not going to live there, go ahead and check this list off anyway. Find out how much does it cost to rent a house in town. How much does it cost for a safe place to live? How much is food, right? In America, honey, help me here, a box of cornflakes, was what, $1.50, something like that, and when we left. But in Malawi, $10. Now think about what that's going to do to our food bill. $1.50 up to $10. That's a massive amount of inflation, I guess is what you could call that. The gasoline price quadrupled. Our rent tripled. So everything that we were used to in America, throw that budget out the window. I've got to know, how much is it going to cost? Medical care. Is there a hospital nearby? If there's not one, we need to get medical training so that we can take care of ourselves or our kids. So you have to factor in all that stuff. So before you get there, write out a list, everything that you want to know about. And while you're there, if you can do it, go see the embassy, because that'll be down here in number 4. You can ask them about the legal requirements for getting into the country and living there. Now, a lot of this you'll find online, so you may not have to physically go to the office, but you do need to at least tend to those things, all right? Now, just know the purpose or goal of being a missionary. You need to train men that can take your spot, all right? So look at 2 Timothy 2, verse number 2. You are essentially working yourself out of a job. That's the goal. 2 Timothy 2, verse 2. Paul says, "And the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also." The first thing I started praying for after God solidified in my heart we were going to Malawi, I said, "God, please provide for us faithful men." And God answered that prayer abundantly. And the men are still getting trained. I showed you recently in church, there's still new churches getting started. You want something that will last after you're done, whether that's leaving the field or dead, or let's not say the rapture. Hopefully everybody goes right from the church at that time. But you want something that'll outlast you. You don't want to go to the foreign field and just be a pastor. And I have to be careful here, right? Because that's the temptation. Here I am in Potch. Why not just be satisfied with Potch? I don't know a whole lot of pastors here in town. I do know a few, but I don't know too many that have a church and a Bible school. But the reason I emphasize the Bible school part of the ministry is because this is where I get to train men to go out and be missionaries and pastors. And that is an emphasis, and I want it to continue to be one. I think it should be an emphasis in every local church. But if somebody is a pastor, and that's all he's going to be, he's not a missionary, just a pastor. He is not a church planter, see? He's not called to go start churches. He's called to take a church and lead the congregation. That's a pastor. Nothing wrong with that. It's a fine calling. We need that. But the guy who's going to be a church planter, if he's doing it on a foreign field, I think we could call him a missionary. He's been sent out. But even you would call it home missions, because he's not leaving his home country. But he can still be sent out of his church to another city within that country, and that's legitimate mission work. It's just home missions. But he is going to start a church from scratch. Now, I want to fulfill my role as a missionary, which means I want to see more churches started. But the way I did it in Malawi, I started churches. I started one, then I put it in the hands of a pastor and went to the next. Started that one, gave it to the pastor, went to the next. And while I'm doing that, I had a Bible school where I'm training men so they can go out and start other churches on their own. And now that I'm here, until God says leave Potch, I'm going to stay in Potch and keep training men. But my prayer is that more and more men head out in various places in South Africa, and we will assist them, get those churches up and running, help them get situated as the pastor, and then leave it to them. I won't go pastor that church. Right? That's not my plan. I don't think that's what God wants me to do. I'm going to focus my attention here. But I will be a part of that new ministry getting started. So there's different ways you can go about that. But always keep in mind, what is the goal? You want to see more local churches started in that field that God's called you to. And that will require training those men. So you are going to have to think about a Bible school type atmosphere. Now, if you're just a pastor called to a church, nothing wrong with that. But what about if you have a young man in your congregation and he wants further training? Now, God may not have equipped you. Maybe you're not ready to teach a man and prepare him for the ministry. No shame in that. You're going to send him to somebody's Bible school. All right? And hopefully that's what we can provide here. If you go out and start a church in some other city and some guy says, listen, I want to go in the ministry. Ship him off to Bible school for a few years, and then off he goes. See, so you can still be generating other churches, but in an indirect way. All right, next thing on the list, legal requirements. As I mentioned earlier, check with the embassy, check the websites. There are visas that you're going to have to think about, permanent residency. You might want to consider citizenship. I mean, there's various levels to this. I am a permanent resident of South Africa, but I'm not a citizen, which basically means I can't vote. Everything else I have to do. I have to pay tax. I have to do everything that a South African would do, but I don't get to decide who runs the country. I have no say in that, which is fine with me. I'm not quite sure my vote would matter that much anyway, so it is what it is. When I got to Malawi, I didn't know about this. I don't know if, I never missed a class at Bible school, so it's not like I could say I was absent that day. I was never absent. I must not have been listening or something, because I showed up at the airport with my family, and I said, yes, we'd like to live here, please. And they said, we want to live here. I said, yes, we're missionaries. We want to live here permanently. No, 3 months. I was like, 3 months? I got everything I own in the world in those bags, and my family here 3 months. That's not going to work. And my goodness, the prayer and fasting, and I had, what a time that was. I had to go down to Blantyre, which is 5 hours south of where we lived, to register my church as an official organization in the country. Because if you don't have a sponsor, you have to have an organization to file for a visa. So I can't go down to immigration and say, please give me a 2-year work visa or anything. I don't have any sponsors. I don't know any missionaries there. I showed up just unannounced. Here I am. Let me live here. I thought that's how it worked. I thought they go, oh, missionary, thank you. Hey, we've been waiting. Hey, thank you. It wasn't like that. So then they said, no, you got to go get a lawyer, file the paperwork. I've never done anything. I've never even met a lawyer. I know they exist, but I had never met a lawyer in my life. I went down there, paid the guy, filed the papers, and long story short, it was an absolute miracle. I talked to other missionaries and said, how long does the process take to get registered? One guy said 2.5 years, one guy said 4 years. I have 9 months altogether. They gave me a short extension. I thought, we're not going to make it within 8 months. I had 9 months, 8 months in, I think 8 months and a week or something like that. I got the papers, registered, I went to immigration, boom, got the visa, and then we had to renew every 2 years. So it worked out, but again, you can see there's a lot of mistakes I've made I'm trying to save you from. Now, we have Frickie and Frickalina, legal requirements. It's getting tougher and tougher. But if God calls you to that place, you're just going to have to be smart, wise as a serpent, right? Harmless as a dove. But there's a way to get that done. You will have to strive lawfully, though, until they ask you to do something sinful, right? Like don't preach, don't evangelize. Now I have to obey God rather than men. But as long as they're not asking you to do anything illegal or sinful, then by all means. All right, the next thing, the language. Now this one, you can shift anywhere, right? You can start picking up a language tonight. You can start, right? You may not get the gift of tongues like they did in Acts, but you can start learning a new language at any time. This I recommend strongly. If you're going to be on a foreign field, learn that language. Now, coming to South Africa, you guys are just, the Rainbow Nation. So which language do you focus on? That's the problem for me. If there was one predominant language, I would focus on it. And I have tried to pick up Afrikaans. I can actually carry on a conversation. Not a great one, but I can carry it on. I tried Tswana for a little while. The thing is, there's English everywhere. And I'm so busy ministering in English, I just don't have the time that I once did to learn a new language. But in Malawi, of course, that was a big area of focus, and it really paid off, really made a difference when you could walk into a crowd and start speaking their mother tongue. There was one time we were having a petrol shortage, Americanism. We were having a petrol shortage in Malawi, and we all went to the petrol station. The line was at least 1 kilometer long, at least. And at the petrol station, oh my goodness, it was a zoo. I mean, there were cars, vehicles, trucks everywhere. So nobody could move. There was no queue, right, except on the road. In the car park, everybody was just cramming into the pump, trying to be there so that when the truck showed up to put the petrol in, we could all get our jerry cans filled and go home. So it was a mess. Finally, the truck showed up, and it turned into a riot. I mean, people are hitting each other and screaming and stealing. I thought, oh, my soul. The policemen, they went to the middle of the petrol station. They're shouting, everybody, stop, 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 waving their sticks, their batons and all this stuff. And it was just chaos. I thought, man, what do I do? Because I need petrol. So what I did is I opened my door. I had a RAV4. I opened the door. I didn't stand on top of the vehicle, but the floorboard. I stood there so that I was, head and shoulders above the people then. And then I shouted out in their language. I said, "Hey, azibambo, musachi de choncho, don't do like this." And it was amazing. Eh? Hey, mzungu, this white man, hey, say something else. I had something to say. I started preaching the gospel. I did. I said, oh, they're listening. Okay. I told him, I said, and then off I went preaching about Jesus. The policeman came over to me because that calmed everybody down. I told them all, we need to obey the policemen. They're going to give us order. Everybody's going to get petrol, but we need to let them lead us. And everybody said, okay, thank you, shop. And the policeman came over and grabbed my hand and pulled me to the front of the line. I kid you not, filled my jerry cans and made a path for me to get out of the car park and go home. Man, thank God I know the language. It really makes a difference in a lot of ways. All right, and then these two here at the end, 6 and 7. Again, guys, this could be at the top of the list if you wanted to put it there. So I'm not trying to say this is like level of importance, but your family and your health. When you're going to this foreign field and moving there, consider that you might be super excited, but your kids especially. They're leaving behind everything they know. It's scary for you. It's even worse for them. Make sure that they are as comfortable as possible. Now, I'm not saying extravagant. I'm not saying you have to, live in luxury, but make sure they're in a place where they can feel comfortable and safe. Wow, when we got to Malawi, in America, you've seen pictures, right? I mean, some of you maybe have been there. We don't have fences around our homes to protect us. If you have a fence around your house, it's to keep the dog in. It is. That's the only reason. Either that or just privacy. You don't want people to see you brine and swimming, barbecuing and swimming in the backyard. That's it. So to get here or there and have fences around and then barbed wire and broken glass and dogs, we had 3 night guards, broken glass, rolled barbed wire, 2.5 meter high, 3 meter high brick wall, and thieves still got in consistently. Well, I'm doing all I can to make them feel safe, but there's only so much you can do. But yeah, just continue to put attention, give that attention to make sure they're as comfortable as they can be. What we did, and you need to know your family and how they're built, but what we did is in our home, we were Americans. That was our safe haven. When we got home, we're no longer speaking Chewa. We don't have to abide by the culture of the land. In our home, our culture, we're going to be American. And that's not to say we had a flag flying around, nothing like that, but we lived comfortably in our home the way we would want to relax and enjoy each other's company. Now, as soon as I stepped out of the door, I was a Malawian. So I would flip my mind every day. All Chewa. I would speak nothing but Chewa while I'm out, even to the point where one lady gave me a new name. I got a tribal name while I was there, so that when I went various places, I could tell them, I am of this tribe. And they go, "Ah, you are that tribe?" And I said, "Yes, I am Mbewe." They said, "Mbewe? From where?" And I'd tell them. They said, "Hey, you are a Chewa." I said, "Yes, I'm telling you, I'm Malawian." And this one is Amy Nambewe Flick. Now, that's not an official name, mind you. Her real name is Madeline, Amy Madeline Flick. But when I presented her in church, because she was born in Malawi, I held her up and I said, because the female way to say Mbewe is Nambewe. So I said, "Iye ndiye Nambewe." And they went, "That is our baby." Because she's a Malawian baby, right? So she's the real deal, African American. That's what she is, the real deal. Okay, so make sure that you're safe, that your family's comfortable, and that you check into like what kind of food you can get. It's going to take a little time to adjust. The climate, Potch is one of the worst places to live on planet Earth for my health. Now, you may be just fine, but wow, the air here, there's a very high elevation. I didn't know that. And the pollen count, like for allergies, many doctors have told me one of the worst places to live if you have allergies is Potch. When I went to the coast, what was it, couple months ago? Yeah, July, I think. When we were there, wow, within a week, I couldn't, right now I can't, right? I can't breathe right. When I got there, all of a sudden I could fill my lungs with air. I thought, ooh, wow, I feel great. Like I'm 10 years younger. I feel wonderful. And then as soon as I got back here, I was like, oh, it's so heavy here. But now you do get used to it, right? You do acclimate a bit. God help us. If the Lord had called us to India, after having that experience there, whoo, man, at 50 degrees, the government there has a rule that you're not allowed to work anymore. All the employees get to go home when the thermometer hits 50. So what the companies do is when it gets to 49, they shut off the thermometers, take them off the wall, or if it's electronic, they shut it off so that their employees have to keep working. It gets over 50 degrees. And they're working in factories and, oh my goodness, walking through the streets at 10 o'clock at night, everything opens up. That freaked me out because we were going to prayer meetings at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 in the morning going to prayer meetings. So we're driving through the villages and towns, and I'm thinking, why are all these little I want to say shops. Help me, somebody. When you set it up in the townships, you see them. The little stalls, vendors. Yeah, sorry, the right word's escaping me. But they had those set up at 10 o'clock at night. It was because of the heat. Those guys could not operate during the day. It was too hot. People couldn't walk to the market and shop. Thank God we're in Africa right after seeing that kind of heat. Woo! I'd like to be in India for other reasons, but I don't know if I would have survived, right? With the way I kind of pushed myself, I don't know if I would have made it. So always just keep those things in mind. All right, I'm going to finish up with one other thought, and we'll be done. Come to 1 Corinthians 11. I am going to backtrack a little bit. Last week we talked about some potential dangers in the church, and I got to thinking more about that, and I appreciate the feedback that I got. I like it when somebody brings a different opinion to the table. Really helps you think it through. It's always good to have another perspective on this. And I want to clarify something. What I said about Calvinism and charismaticism, right? Now, remember, we talked about the truth, and then you have this upright position, but then you get extremes, yeah? So I didn't use the word last week, but it's a proper term to say hyper-Calvinism or hyper-charismaticism. But I did tell you that I drew this, the upright thing of truth, and that there are different levels, right? Now, who gets to define what hyper is? How extreme is extreme? Well, for a lot of people, if you're one step farther than me, you're hyper. So that's kind of a fluid term, and that's why it's tricky to use it. But, guys, I stand by that there are dangers within those two things I pointed out, Calvinism, charismaticism. But it's not limited to those two things. Any heresy can damage a church, right? Any heresy. So what do you do if you have a church member that doesn't agree with some of the more fundamental things of the church? Do you kick them out just because they believe differently? I mean, they're sitting, maybe through the teaching and preaching, they will be convinced otherwise. So do you just run them off because they don't agree? Because if you do that, you probably won't have a lot of church members. It's very unlikely they show up at your doorstep pre-packaged with all the truth they need, right? That's not going to happen. So 1 Corinthians 11, let me give you just a couple words of advice on that. I need 18. I'm sorry. I think I said 17, but get 18. He says, for first of all, when you come together in the church, I hear that there be divisions among you, and I partly believe it, for there must be also heresies among you. So Paul, when he heard of these divisions, he said, yep, there must be heresies there. That's why you guys are dividing, because you can't agree on the truth. He says that they which are approved may be made manifest among you. So what was happening in the Corinthian church is, here you have the pastor saying, here's what the Bible says, here's what we believe and teach, but then you had other people coming in going, hey, but I believe this, but I believe that. As soon as this person starts vocalizing their disagreements, now they're leading people away. Now that's unethical and unbiblical. If they don't agree to the point of, I cannot stay quiet, I have to say something, then they need to be out of the church. And if people want to hear their opinion, they can talk to them elsewhere. But happening within the church, this is where Hebrews 13, verse 17 would apply. You submit yourself to the person that has the rule over you. So within that church, here's how you'd handle it. You say to that brother, that sister, listen, if you don't agree, I respect the fact that you're allowed to believe differently than me. And that's fine. But I do, as long as you're part of the church, I expect you to support what we're doing here. If somebody comes to you and says, I heard you don't agree with this or that doctrine, you don't have to lie and say, no, I agree. You can tell them, listen, I don't agree, and I have some reasons. But I also respect the authority of the pastor. So if you would like to know more, I'm happy to tell you, but I would really rather that you go ask, in this case, go ask Pastor Mike about it, and see if he has something to share with you. I really wouldn't have a problem with you explaining your position, especially if you address it that way, to say, listen, this is just my thing. Pastor Mike sees it differently. Please go hear his side of it as well. I can deal with that. See? If my position is so flimsy that it cannot hold up to a opposite opinion or an opposite perspective, then I must not have a very robust position, right? I must not have much truth to that if the slightest disagreement is going to undo it. So I'm not afraid to have people that don't agree, but I am afraid when they start vocalizing it and undermining the beliefs of the church. If that's where you're at, you need to go somewhere else and talk about those things on your own time. It's the same, right? If I were to walk into McDonald's and go, hey, everybody, hamburgers are horrible. Chicken, we all need fried chicken, and then it start advertising KFC. That's unethical. You don't go into the guy's shop and start advertising the other restaurant. Now, if you want to go stand in a neutral place, like on the side of the road, and say, hey, everybody come to this restaurant, help yourself, right? And if somebody wants to walk up to you and go, hey, I heard you like that restaurant, tell me why. Fine. But to go into the McDonald's and purposely start telling other people about the other restaurant, wait a minute. Now you're trying to undo the business. And that's why I say it's unethical. All right, so guys, that's all I got for you. Any questions? Any of this stuff? All good? Okay, here are your questions for the local church exam. Number 1, describe the local church and the universal church. I don't need the novel. Just a brief description, right? Short description. Number 2, give 4 reasons to start and to actively participate in a local church. Guys, packet. You can just work right off the packet there, okay? Number 3, name 3 biblical offices possible for a local church. I give you 4. Choose 3. Number 4, what is the one key element that... Sorry, I didn't word this properly. What is the one key element sought for in the capacity of leadership? Sorry, I'll have to reword this, but right here, page 2, you can see where I'm pointing. I give you this one sentence. There's one key element. It doesn't matter if you are one of these biblical offices or an extra biblical office. If you're the sound technician, there's one thing that is required of you. All right, number 5. List the 4 steps for starting a local church using the order presented in class. Now, I did say when I taught this that it might happen in a different order, but I want you to use this order, all right, in this order. That's how you have to give it. Number 6, name 3 challenges a local church can face. This is on page 4, challenges. I've given you more than that. You name 3. Number 7, how are unfaithful members detrimental to a local church? You have a lot of room to answer this. I will accept any correct answer. There's a lot of ways you can go there. Number 8, what can the pastor's wife not do? Number 9, biblically define the word labor. We covered that tonight. And number 10, describe a calling and a burden. Now, you can, if you want to define them both, that's perfectly fine. Or if you want to just talk about what the difference is between them, again, I'll accept any right answer on that. And then 2 memory verses, Acts 20, verse 28, and Hebrews 13, verse 17. All right, that's everything, guys. Let's take a break. Let Garrett get set up.